Okay, so we're holding a Parshas Vigash Perek Mem Vav Pasuk Be'erech Gimel. Okay, but I want to comment first on the last pasuk in Perek Mem Hey, where Yaakov said Rav Oid Yosef Benichai Rav. So on that word Rav, the Medrash comments that Yaakov said Rav Koichoy Shal Yosef. How great is Yosef's power that he maintained his tzidkus despite being in exile and in Mitzrayim for so long, whereas I said Nistur Adarki Me Hashem. That's the Medrash. Yaakov said Nistur Adarki Me Hashem, whereas Yosef retained his tzidkus in all these years that he was in exile. And we explained that Yosef is very comfortable with Hashem hiding himself. In fact, he embraces that, which is what the axis of the whole dispute between him and the brothers revolves around. Well, the dispute revolves around the axis of whether one should deliberately embrace and engage in the dark arts of Hashem's hiddenness, or one should seek knowledge of Hashem and clarity and accept the hiddenness as it comes. But that last point about accepting the hiddenness as it comes is what's challenging for those kinds of people. Yosef was oimid b'tzidkoi despite being in exile because he's very comfortable with exile. Yaakov, who's not comfortable with exile and therefore he doesn't embrace exile, when it happens, he says Nistur Adarki Hashem. He thinks that his ways are hidden from Hashem because awful things are happening to him. While Yosef, who runs to the awful things and actually brings them upon himself, is the one who therefore is able to withstand the trials of terrible things happening. Okay, now I want to show that there are allusions that this word Rav is used in a few places in Tanakh that are alluding to the Yosef Yaakov narrative, and the word Rav is used to point to this notion, and I'll explain why. By seeing these sources inside, we'll also understand why the word Rav is used to indicate this midah of Yosef, the midah of Yosef that makes him able to withstand the challenges of Galus that make a Yaakov think that he's hidden from Hashem, that Hashem is not aware of him. So in Yeshaya Perek Mem, pasuk of Zayin is the pasuk Loma Sober Yaakov v'Sedaber Yisol Nistur Adarki Hashem Umei Elohai Mishpati Ya'avor. Why Yaakov do you say Yaakov that my way is hidden from Hashem? This is a taina on Yaakov. Why is he saying that Hashem is not aware of him? This is the chait of Yaakov, according to the Medrash Tanchuma, I think says that. Everyone was chayte, Yaakov was chayte because he said Nistur Adarki Me Hashem. So the pasuk prior to that says, lift up your eyes and see who created the stars. He calls them by name because he has so much power. He has roiv oinim. So Hashem is roiv oinim. Hashem has a lot of power. Ish lo nedar. Nobody is lacking. Which parenthetically, Yaakov again in the beginning of Perek Mem Vav thinks that his way is hidden from God because he, as we discussed last year, he thinks that he's on the border of Eretz Yisrael means that he's going away from Hashem's domain, and therefore he takes leave of him by bringing zvachim to him, and Hashem corrects that by telling him, no, I'm going with you. And because Hashem is going with him, therefore l'goy godla simcha sham. And because Hashem told him l'goy godla simcha sham, therefore we count the shivim nefesh further in this parak that went down with him to Mitzrayim. Because the numbers of Bnei Yisrael are going to be mushkach from Hashem, and that's what this pasuk says in Yeshaya Mem pasuk Chavav. Right before that pasuk, Lo Moser Yaakov, it says, "Look, Hashem counts the stars, ish lo nedar," and as we know, the fact that Hashem counts the stars associated with the fact that he counts B'nai Yisrael, which we're going to see again in this context of Rav in Tehillim Kuf Zayin. But I'll get to that in a moment. But here I'm just pointing out this Roiv Einim. Now going to Tehillim Kuf Zayin, where it says the same thing. Moinem mispar lakoi chavim lechulam shem v'yikra. Gadol anininu v'rav koyach l'sunasei ein mispar. So since he's Rav Koyach, and since his understanding is infinite, therefore he can count the stars. We can't count the stars because they go on forever. But he is Moitzi b'mispar tziva'am, because he is Roiv Einim. And by the way, the next pasuk back to Yeshaya, where it says, why do you say my way is hidden from God? Halo yadatim lo shamata, Hashem is the God of the whole world. Ein cheker l'sunasei. There's no cheker, like l'sunasei ein cheker of Kufan Zayin, meaning Hashem is infinite, therefore he's not limited to the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Don't you realize, Yaakov, that Hashem knows what's going on and he's with you when you leave Eretz Yisrael, and therefore noisen la yoef koyach ulein onim otzma yarbe, and koyve Hashem yachaliv koyach yarutzu v'lo yafu vayokom Yaakov vayisu. I'm sorry, but yeah, vayokom Yaakov vayisu b'nei Yisrael Yaakov avihem. Now he has the energy to go. After Hashem corrected his error of thinking that Hashem's hashgacha ends on the boundaries of Beersheba, of Eretz Yisrael at Beersheba, now Hashem says, I am actually with you. I'm going there with you because I am Elokei Olam, the God of the world. Okay, so going back to Kuf Mem Zayin, God Lodin Rav Koyach, in Mispar, there's again the Rav, and we'll soon show you how that reflects on Yosef. Tehillim Lamed Gimel, which corresponds to Yaakov and Yosef and has a lot of parallels to Kuf Mem Zayin. We keep on going back to that. There it says, Ein hamelech noishe b'rov chayil, gibur lo yinotzel b'rov koyach, shekar sos l'shua b'rov chayil lo yimalek, hine Hashem b'rov machem b'chastoi. This is the same as lo b'gruas sos echel sos v'shek yish, what's Hashem b'rov machem b'chastoi, etc. Okay, and there in Lamed Gimel it's clearly about a Rav, and it's about the Dvar Hashem, which this Rav was really a mashal or a simon that we're lacking is Dvar Hashem. We think we're lacking food, but really we're lacking Dvar Hashem, because b'Dvar Hashem shamayim nasu, and therefore if you know the Dvar Hashem, you'll have food. Okay. But there it says, Ein hamelech noishe b'rov choyel, gibur lo yinotzel b'rov koyach, which like we said, it corresponds to also Shekas tos Yeshua, Rav chayil yimaleit, that corresponds to Lo b'gruas sos echel lo v'shek yish, which is all about Yosef, who supports Mitzrayim and their susim. He supports them with their own natural wealth. And he is the young man who stands before Paro. He has the shoykei ha'ish, while his father is 100 years older than him. When he is propped up in front of Paro, Vaya'amidehu, he lacks the shoykei ha'ish, but he does have something, which is Roitz Hashem Esirei of and Yaakov brings an end to the hunger through Yiras Hashem. But Yosef's midah is Rav Chayil. He thinks that he's going to survive, and Mitzrayim is going to survive through exercising their might. That's what he supports Paro, and he says, you think Mitzrayim is doomed. Actually, you're so wealthy that you could even, with a little bit of planning, you could even survive a hunger by using what? The wealth of Mitzrayim. Nothing else. So he depends on Rav Koyach, Rav Cheloi, which is Gvuras Hasotzos, and really Gadol Adonenu Rav Koyach Mispar, unlike Yosef, who has Rav but limited. Hashem is the real Rav, and he is unlimited. So Yosef is the midah of Rav. Why is the word Rav referred to Yosef? Because Yosef has power, which of course is in numbers, and which is to say, again, as I started, that he dabbles in non-godly things, as Hester. Because of that, he's able to maintain his tzidkus no matter what happens to him. While I, Yaakov, who seek pure das Hashem, the moment I'm not in that situation, I am challenged with thinking that Hashem is abandoning me. Okay? That's that, which we're going to get back to this soon. I want to say a few comments on the next psukim, and then we're going to focus on one nakuda. Hashem Elokim said to Yisrael in Maris Halayla. So I just want to draw a parallel. We mentioned that the message over here that Ered and A'al, Anochi Ered Imcha Mitzrayim Anochi A'al Chan Gam Ola, reminds us of the Malach Elohim Olim B'Yordan Boya, and the last time Yaakov was leaving Israel and going into exile. And there, Vayolan Shom Ki Bo Hashemesh, and here too we have Maris Halayla. And another place where we have this talk about what's going to happen to Israel in Mitzrayim is at the bris bein Mitzrayim, and there it says Vayi Hashem eshul lavoi sardim nachla lavro. Okay. Vayomer anochi hakel elokei avicha. I do not know how to translate this. I don't know what this means. It doesn't mean I am the God who is the God of your father. But then is kel the same thing as aloika? So I don't even know how to type these words. Or is anochi kel as a proper noun? But then why does it have hakel? So that maybe means the God who is the God of your father. But like I said, is that kel mean plain God, generic? So I don't know how to read this. And I actually didn't. I looked a little bit in the question, but not enough. Just putting this out there. But the point of the pasuk is that, as we said, he's slaughtering to the God of his father Yitzchak, which is to say that Yaakov doesn't call Hashem his own God, as we discussed in the previous shir. It's not so simple for Hashem to be the God of anyone, and it requires Ani Hashem and embracing that. And Yaakov said Anochi lo yadati last time, and here he thinks he doesn't have the proper relationship to Hashem. Hashem has to reveal himself to him and tell him, I'm going to be with you. And that message, I'm going to be with you wherever you go, is called Ani Hashem in Yeshaya. And further in that parak, after the Lama Tema Yaakov, we'll see soon. Don't be afraid, I'm going to be with you. Mamash like he says over here. And that depends on Ani Hashem. Yaakov doesn't recognize Ani Hashem. His relationship to Hashem is mediated by the fact that he's the God of his father. If he brings Kabbanis to Lelekei Aviv Yitzchak, so Elokim appears to him and says, I am that God, the God of your father. Now let's focus on the end of Pasuk Gimel. This is what I'm going to focus on in this shir. And a little bit Pasuk Dalet. Al tira meir da Mitzrayim ki legoy godel asim Hashem. Don't be afraid of going down to Mitzrayim, because I will make you into a great nation there. So first of all, Al tira, you have to read this pasuk. You have to say Al tira. Oh, he's telling him not to be afraid. That implies that he was afraid. Where do we find that he was afraid? Where does it say anything about fear? So, as we discussed, the fact that at Beersheba, which is the border of Eretz Yisrael, he brings Karbonis to the God of his father Yitzchak to take leave of him, of the God of his father Yitzchak, means he thinks that he's taking leave of his God, of Hashem. In other words, he thinks that Hashem is not coming down with him to Mitzrayim, and that's not a chiddush, because Pasuk Dalet says, I will go down with you to Mitzrayim. So that means he thought he wasn't going to do that to Mitzrayim. Which, as we explained, that's why he's bringing Zvachim at the boundary of the border of Eretz Yisrael to say, I'm taking leave of Hashem. So therefore, he's afraid. Naturally, he's afraid. If he thinks he's leaving the domain of Hashem because he's going out of Eretz Yisrael, that's obviously cause for fear. So Hashem is telling him, don't be afraid. And this we see in Yeshaya Perek Mem Aleph. Remember that Perek Mem, then the Perek Mem is where it says, don't say Yaakov Nister Daki Hashem. Okay, Hashem is Rav Oinim. And in Perek Mem Aleph, it says a bunch of times Al Tira and Ani Hashem as well, as we discussed, because Yaakov here is, by bringing Zvachim Lelekei Aviv Yitzchak, he's continuing what happened at the other time, that he had a dream, Malach Elohim Olam Yordim, and he said, Achin Yesh Hashem Makam Hazev Anochi Lo Yodati. He wasn't embracing Ani Hashem. Here too, he's continuing in his lack of fully embracing Ani Hashem, by not understanding that Hashem is everywhere. Okay? So let's show you. So like I said, then Perek Mem in Yeshaya tells him Hashem created the whole world. Ktsoy Sa'aretz. Bati Yisrael Avdi Asher Chazakti Gemektsoi Sa'aretz Al Tira Ki Imcha Anochi, which is my paraphrase, of course, of this parak, of these psukim, that Al Tira Anochi Ered Imcha, and there it says Ani Hashem Machazek Yiminecha, I am Hashem, I'm holding on to you, Hamelech Al Tira Ani Azarticha Al Tiri Telas Yaakov, and fine, Ani Hashem will not abandon you. Ani Hashem will not abandon you takes us again back to Vayetze, where he says Lo Ya'azavcha Ani Hashem Lekei Avram Richa, and Lo Ya'azavcha. Okay. Weiter. Now, I want to focus now on a question which is not an obvious question, but I think if you think about it, you'll see there's something difficult here. And noticing this problem will unlock the deeper meaning of this pasuk and also the next pasuk. Don't be afraid of going down, because l'goy god lasim chasham. I find this to be not mamash non sequitur, but the end of the pasuk doesn't properly, or obviously properly comports to the ratio of the pasuk, but it doesn't obviously work with the ratio. Why? Because the beginning of the pasuk says, "Don't be afraid." So as we say, why is he afraid? Because he's leaving Eretz Yisrael, Hashem will abandon him. He's not under Hashem's control. So then he should tell him, you are under Hashem's control. Al tira, because like it says in Yeshaya, Al tira ki imcha anochi. Well, Al tira anochi eirin mercham Mitzrayim. Why is l'goy god lasim chasham the main thing to focus on when the message is Altira. He's not afraid that he won't become a good gadol. He's afraid that he won't be protected by Hashem, or maybe he's afraid of something new. Canaan is not his land either. He's among strangers there, but okay, it's the land of Hashem, or maybe he's used to it, and now he's going to a new country. He knows what's going to happen. Fine, but what's l'goy god lasim kashon? How does that respond to the problem of al tira? Well, it's an additional gift. You don't have to become a goy gadol to not be afraid. Okay. So, before we explain this, why there's a focus on a goy gadol, we have to point out just a few psukim that relate to this goy gadol. One is obviously in Kisavai, Arami Eviravi Eretzaim, Vahi Shom L'goy gadol. Okay, that's of course coming from this pasuk, Vahi L'goy gadol Lasim Kasham, and lo and behold, Vahi Shom L'goy gadol. There in Mitzrayim it became gadol, and that stress of there in Mitzrayim became gadol takes us to another goy gadol. In the beginning of Lech Lecha, go off to the land of Canaan, ve'es chol l'goy gadol. So Avram is told, go to the land of Canaan, and it'll become a goy gadol. And here Yaakov is being told, ve'escha ki l'goy gadol asim chasham. It's ironic, because the place to become a goy gadol is supposed to be Canaan. And here, vayi sham l'goy gadol becomes a goy gadol in Mitzrayim. Okay. And the truth is that, yes, in Mitzrayim is where it says, Pnei Yisrael par vayishuv v'tzvi b'atzmayim. Oh, that's where they became a goy gadol. Very interesting. The eschol goy gadol to Avram ultimately was not fulfilled in the land of Canaan. Hashem told him, Lech lecha me'atzim, go to the land of Canaan, ve'eschol goy gadol. But it took a return, a leaving the land of Canaan, a return to exile, to ultimately become a goy gadol, which is very interesting. Except for, and this is important, except for the tribes of Yosef, of Menashe and Ephraim, as it says in Sefer Yeshua, Ephraim became very mighty in numbers, and they needed more space, and as the Gemara explains, other Shvatim became numerous in Mitzrayim. Not Yosef's progeny, they became numerous in Eretz Yisrael, as the pasuk says, V'yidgu l'roiv b'kerev ha'aretz, they'll increase like fish, l'roiv, their reveal is going to happen. Remember the word Rav. I'm going to get back to that soon, later. Their reveal is going to happen b'kerev ha'aretz and Eretz Yisrael, while the reveal of the rest of the Bnei Yisrael happens davka in Mitzrayim. Okay. Now, to understand what's going on over here, why is this don't be afraid come along with goy gadol asim kasham? Let's look at another context of an exile and the word of Hashem to the exiles, telling them how they should experience their exile and how Hashem is with them. This is in Yirmiyah Perek Tes. This is Golus Bavel. And what's the message? Koyomar Hashem el kitzavokas alekei yisrael l'chol hagoy asher igleisim Yisrael and bevelo benu votim vashevu v'nit'u ganois v'echluas piryon kechu noshim. Get married. V'hoilidu banu u'banis. Get married and have children. U'kchulav nechem noshim, and your son should get married. V'esbnei seichem tu noshim, and your daughters. V'silanda banu u'banis. You should have the next generation. U'revu sham v'al tim'otu. You should increase there and don't let your numbers decline. Hashem wants you to stay in Babel for 70 years. After 70 years, He's going to remember you. Tikva, Hashem is thinking good things. And to go back to something we discussed a bunch of times, when the Navi says Hashem is thinking good thoughts, what that means is there's no word of Hashem in exile. Things are not clear. They're not explicable. Explicable is Das Hashem ba'aretz, be in Eretz Yisrael. Fact is that now you're going to not experience Das Hashem in Eretz Yisrael, so we can't have clarity about the word of Hashem and understand His actions in Golus. But we could know that He has machshavos shalom v'lo l'ra'ah. Los lechem acharis v'sikvo. Right now things are not good, but they're going to be good, and that's called Hashem's thought. That there's something inexplicable which is going to lead to something good. Which is what is the good thing that's going to lead to? You're going to seek out Hashem, and He's going to bring you back. Etc. So notice that the message to them is Revu Sham va'altim atu. Get married and have children. That means that if not for the Navi telling them that Hashem is thinking good thoughts about them and He's planning on redeeming them after 70 years, they should not have children, right? Because He has to tell them, get married, revusham ba'altimotum. So let's think about that. What would be the havamina? Why should we think that their numbers should decline? It goes like this, very simple. Because if Hashem doesn't want them to be there, meaning if their being there is not purposeful and doesn't have a plan, if Hashem is not thinking good about Bnei Yisrael, in other words, we know Hashem is not talking good about Bnei Yisrael because, that is to say, we cannot explain what's happening. It doesn't make sense to us. But is that because Hashem has a secret plan, machshavos, or is it that Hashem really abandoned us? So if Hashem abandoned us, then let's commit suicide. Let's let our numbers dwindle till we cease to exist. Because our function is to be the people of Hashem. If Hashem is no longer interested in us, then let's just let this thing get over with. Says the Navi, no. The fact that you're in exile is not because Hashem doesn't want you anymore. It's such that you should say, we lost our identity, and we're never going to go back to Eretz Yisrael, and we have no reason to exist as what we are. Rather, Hashem does have a plan for you, and Hashem wants you to be there, and therefore you should have children. Revusham ba'altimotum. So this is the exact same message as Yaakov is receiving, which is what? Don't be afraid. You're not leaving Hashem. So if you're not leaving Hashem and yet you're going to exile, how does Hashem function in exile? Exile is the place where Hashem's not revealed. The answer is Hashem, but yet it says Hashem is going down with you. So that's what the Navi says. I'm thinking good thoughts is the same thing as saying Hashem is with you in exile. It means to say what's happening in exile is also part of Hashem's plan, but it's a different kind of plan. There's plans in there, which is plans that are clear and revealed. Those are called diburim and nevuah. And there's plans of Hashem where He's in Iblis and Gos, those are called machshava. Anochi eredim chom b'tzayim, it means it's all with a plan, even though you can't articulate it and can't understand it. Therefore, l'goy god lasim chosham. Therefore, don't think you're not supposed to be a nation. Don't say we're going away from Hashem, so let's just not have children anymore. No, you should still have children because Hashem is still with you. You're still part within Hashem's plan. Therefore, you're still identified as being Hashem's people, and therefore you have still a reason to exist. And we're going to have children. Fine. Okay, so that's number one. So that's my answer to the question of how does Altira Mitzrayim, how's the Goy Lasim Hashem respond to Altira? Because if you're afraid, you think that you're leaving Hashem, then you think that you no longer have reason to exist, and you will not increase, but rather you will let your numbers dwindle. But since he was told, don't be afraid, I am with you, therefore now he has a mission, which is to survive the exile, and not only to survive, but to thrive so that he can come back. And that brings me to the next point, which is that by increasing in numbers, therefore they'll come back. As it's at the beginning of Shemais. When Bnei Yisrael is Otzmi Menu, that's when they realize, that's when the Parah said they're going to leave. And that made them realize they're not going to stay. As it says also in Isaiah Perek Beis. It says, "V'hoya mispar b'nei Yisrael k'choil hayom asher lo yimelech lo yisafer v'nikpetzu b'nei Yehuda b'nei Yisrael yachdav v'zom l'mashiach v'olu min ha'aretz." Like it says later in that parak, "Uchayoyim aloisam etzayim," because their numbers are going to increase. Therefore, v'olu min ha'aretz, mamish like Shmois Perek Aleph. It's playing off Shmois Perek Aleph. I said v'olu min ha'aretz, right? Why? Because they're going to be numerous. So when Hashem says "L'goy god lasimcha sham," that's what's going to lead to you coming out. Therefore, so this ties into pasuk Dalet. L'goy god lasimcha sham, and therefore anochi eredim chamatzayim necha gam olei. I am going to orchestrate it that you come out. How? Because I am going to make sure you turn into a goy while you're there, and that's what's going to be the catalyst for you to eventually be oile, like it says in the beginning of Shemais, v'nilcham banu v'olam in Aretz, and like it says in Hosea, that when the mitzvah b'nei Yisrael is kechoyle sheloim and lo yisafer, then som lahem roish and ola min ha'aretz. Okay. Now, let's go back to Yeshaya. We're talking about Goy Gadol. So you remember I mentioned at the beginning of the year that the psukim in Yeshaya Seif Perek Mem talk about looking up to the stars and see who created them. Hamoitzi b'mispar tzava'am. Hashem is the one who could count the stars because He's Roiv Einim, and because, as it says there in Yeshaya Perek Mem, Ein Cheker l'Svunasai. He's the one whose Tvuna is infinite, and because of that, He's able to count the stars which are infinite. Like it says in Tilum Kuf Mem Zayin, Moinem Mispar like Chacham L'chum Shevasipar Godla Ninu Av Koch Sunasai Ein Cheker. And there it says too there it says too. He's going to bring back the Bnei Yisrael who are like Koichavim, like it says in Isaiah. When they increase like Koichavim, that's when they come back to Yerushalayim. Hashem is going to mechanis Nidchei Yisrael by virtue of the fact that He increases them like Koichavim. Now they're so numerous, and that makes them leave. And because He is the one who is Ein Cheker D'Svunasai, therefore His numbers are in a different order than ours. He counts the stars, therefore He makes us numerous like the stars, and because He makes us numerous like the stars, we end up going back to our land, like it says in Isaiah. So the message to Yaakov is, you're going to be a God Gadol because Anochi Ered Imcha Mitzrayim. I'm going down, like it says in Yeshaya. I'm not abandoning you. I'm going down with you, and I count the stars, and I am a Rav Oinim, and I don't have Ein Cheker L'Sunasei. Therefore, if I'm going to be Yered Imcha, you become a God Gadol. As I God Gadol, that's Kechoil and like the Kechavim, and therefore you're going to be Oile Min Haaretz, like it says in Isaiah. Therefore, Anechi Alchol Gam Oloi. Okay, now here's the thing. Here it says in Tilm Kuf Mem Zayin, my name is like Kechavim, etc. And there it says, so the Kechavim then standing for the people. Right? Because if Hashem counts the stars, therefore He's going to count Bnei Yisrael, Nidchei Yisrael Lichanes. And there it says, Berech B'naicha B'kirbech. Your children, your sons, like Yaakov is meeting his sons, they're all together. Nidchei Yisrael Lichanes, everyone's together. But there it's in Yerushalayim. Shabach Yerushalayim, Hashem, Chizek B'rechei Sha'arayich, Berech B'naicha B'kirbech, Some Givulech Shalom. And yet here we're talking about Shalom Parei. And it's not in Yerushalayim, it's in Mitzrayim. Which is another way of saying, what's going on over here? Hashem told Avram, and now it's happening in Mitzrayim. Elamai, Goshen is like Eretz Yisrael, which is something that we discussed, we discussed in the previous year, that Goshen was like Yerushalayim, Ambitzion Yeshiv Yerushalayim is referring to Goshen. Ad Kedei Kach, that some people say that Goshen is actually part of Eretz Yisrael, and there is a city called Goshen in Eretz Yisrael in Sefer Yeshua. Some people say it's the same one. Okay, so now we have the source, Goshen's Keretz Yisrael. This is the source for Chazal, the Bavel's Keretz Yisrael. Why? Because here's the shtickle there. And here it happens in Mitzrayim. It happens in Mitzrayim because Hashem is with us wherever He goes, and He counts the stars. But it says until He counts the stars, and therefore He blesses us in Yerushalayim. And yet this is happening in Mitzrayim. Elamai, Mitzrayim Keretz Yisrael. And since the same thing is in Yirmiyah Perek Chavtes, where He says, go to Bavel and Rusham Ba'altimotu, because I'm thinking about it, which is the same thing as saying Hashem is with you. So the same way Mitzrayim is Keretz Yisrael, then Bavel is Keretz Yisrael. So we have a source for the Gemara that Bavel is Keretz Yisrael. Okay, amazing. Now let's get to Yosef. About Yosef, as we mentioned earlier, Yosef did not become a good Gadol in Mitzrayim, his family. Now look, the roots of this are actually in Perek Mem Aleph, where it says, Perek Mem Aleph Pasuk Mem Tes, is where we have sand that's uncountable. Vayitzbar Yosef bar kechoil hayom harbei ma'od antchi chodalis bar kemis bar. So he piled up bar harbe with the word rav again till there was no number. There's no number for it. Okay, so here we have the countless sand, and Yosef was applying that to grain. Ula Yosef yulad shnei vonim b'tem tov v'shasav, and he had two sons. And we spoke about this then. There's two psukim here about numbers. The first pasuk says countless, no numbers. There was so much grain like the sand, there was no number for it. Which is the smallest number of plural. So there's a contrast there. There's a contrast. The grain is increasing till there was no number. The children, two children. Pshat is like this. The pshat is because it's one or the other. Either you're going to increase the grain or you're going to increase the children. Why? Because really, Loi rav lalechem, kiyum l'shmoy dvar Hashem. Really, we don't need lechem. Really, what do we need? We need yirei shamayim. As it says, v'dvar Hashem shamayim nasu, hine ein Hashem elei re'ov. We don't need gruas asos, we don't need shokei we need Bnei Yisrael. We need Yaakov. Okay? Yosef is focused on the wrong thing. Yosef is focused on the gruas asos, shokei on the wealth and power of Mitzrayim, which is called Rav Cheloi. Rav Choyel. here also increases harbe. He deals with harbe. Yosef dabbles in harbe. He wants a lot. A lot of what? A lot of grain. A lot of grain is the misplaced revia. Really, we want a lot of Bnei Yisrael, Yirei Hashem, but Yosef is looking in the wrong place, so therefore he doesn't get that revia in Mitzrayim. He gets in Eretz Yisrael, but not in Mitzrayim. We'll explain to you in a moment. Okay? Because we want Beich B'nayich B'kir Beich. Wait, let me explain why. Okay? What's the difference between Yosef and us regarding Mitzrayim? As we said, for us, Mitzrayim is like Eretz Yisrael. Why is Mitzrayim like Eretz Yisrael for us? Because Hashem is thinking about us in Mitzrayim. Like it says in Yirmiyah, Hashem wants us to be in Bavel. Hashem wants us to go down to Mitzrayim. He told us we can go. He didn't tell Yosef to go. Yosef embraces Golos even without the Machshava of Hashem. He says, I'll bring it forth myself. I'll jump in even before a Navi tells me that Hashem is thinking good things. So Yosef is embracing the Reviyah and the Gevuras of Mitzrayim, which is the wrong place, misplaced Reviyah. So he's not going to have Be'erach B'nayich till he gets back to the literal, to Yerushalayim, because for him, Mitzrayim is not Keretz Yisrael. He's not in, and also he's not in Goshen, which was the one part that was Keretz Yisrael, and maybe it was actually Keretz Yisrael. So Yosef is in Mitzrayim, that's not Keretz Yisrael. So he's not yet ready to have Roitz Hashem Esirei, to have a Reviyah of Bnei Yisrael, Shabbat Yerushalayim, Chizek B'rich HaShoyach Be'ech B'nayich B'kir B'ech. He's not B'kir B'ech, he's still guaranteeing Shloim Parei. Only after we were told to go to Mitzrayim, then we have the Machshava Shalom. We're told Hashem is with you. Hashem is with you. We're going there because Hashem is with us in Machshava. Those are the Machshava Shalom, not the Shloim Parei. And of course, that's why Yirmiyah says Dirshu Shloim Ma'ir. I skipped that, which is essentially what Yosef was doing. But there's a big difference. Yosef was doing it without Hashem telling him to do it. The Navi is telling us to do it with Hashem telling us to do it, which means Yosef was doing it without knowing that there's a plan. He was creating the plan. He's like acting like Hashem. And we only doing it after we know there's a plan. After we know there's a plan, then even when we're in Bavel, we're like we're in Eretz Yisrael. And then Ve'eskele Gadol, which is supposed to be in Canaan, could happen to us in Mitzrayim. While for Yosef, for whom Mitzrayim is not Keretz Yisrael, and the proof is that he likes the Reviyah of Harbe Ma'od, so he has the misplaced Harbe Ma'od for the Lechem, and not for the Dvar Hashem, therefore he doesn't have Reviyah in the Dvar Hashem. So Yosef, so going back to the Rav, Oid Yosef B'nicha, yes, Yosef has the Rav, and he dabbles in the Tur Harbe Ma'od. Since he has that Rav, that's the wrong Rav, that's the Rav Choyel. It inoculates him against the evils of exile because he's so comfortable with it, but it also means that he's not going to have the Eschol Gadol, which is the numerous children, and that's we see in this psukim in Perek Aleph that he had Choyel Hayom Harbe Ma'od, and because of that he only had Shnei Banim.